Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and a special thanks to Ms. Williamson for graciously accepting our invitation to come to campus and sharing your perspective with students and the greater Dartmouth community. I'm Ella Klinsky, an executive board member of the Dartmouth Political Union, the preeminent, nonpartisan, student-led political organization here on campus. The DPU has joined with the Rockefeller Center to co-sponsor this event series, The Path to the Presidency. For today's program, we have asked Ms. Williamson to make some remarks, respond to some moderated questions before taking questions from you, the audience. But first, a little bit of background on Ms. Williamson. Marianne Williamson is a notable American author, spiritual leader, and activist who has made waves in both the literary and political realms. Her career began in the 1980s, during which time she became deeply involved with HIV and AIDS activism, as well as being a longtime champion for the LGBTQ+ community. In addition, she founded Project Angel Food to deliver meals to the homebound, unable to shop or cook for themselves. To date, the charitable organization has served over 16 million meals. She also founded the LA Center for the Living, the Manhattan Center for the Living, and co-founded the Peace Alliance. Over the years, she has lectured to hundreds and thousands of people on both spiritually and politically progressive topics and sold over 3 million books. With a distinctive blend of spiritual wisdom and political insight, Williamson first entered the political spotlight by running for the Democratic nomination in the 2020 presidential election. Her platform focused on progressive policies, advocating for healthcare reform, economic justice, and climate change mitigation, all informed by her holistic and compassionate approach to governance. In a bold move, Williamson is once again challenging President Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination in the 2024 presidential election. As an essential part of her platform, Williamson proposes a 21st century economic Bill of Rights, a Department of Peace, reparations for slavery, and she declares she's going to end America's drug war. In addition, as a progressive Democrat, Williamson proposes a new economic beginning, including universal health care, tuition-free college, and tech school, and a guaranteed living wage. She also wants to declare a climate emergency and ensure a just transition from a dirty to a clean economy. Please join me in a warm welcome for Ms. Williamson.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, across from Nelson Rockefeller up there. Nelson Rockefeller was a pivotal character in American politics. Of course, he was vice president at one point. Back in the time when I was growing up, when there was this thing called liberal Republicans. So it's pretty interesting to be here in a place founded by him for a nonpartisan conversation, and I think nonpartisan conversation is very important right now. I have heard it said, there is a saying that you can live your life one of two ways. You can live your life out of circumstances, or you can live your life out of a vision. And today, particularly when we think of our collective experience and our political conversation, we are inundated by circumstances, challenging circumstances, stressful circumstances. And it has led us to a point where we're constantly playing whack-a-mole. We got to fix this, we got to fix that. We got the climate emergency, we got Ukraine, we've got wealth inequality, we've got hunger, we've got so many things that we are all struggling with. And our conversation is pretty shallow, to be honest. It is a product of very late 20th century thinking. Talk about the symptoms, don't go into any root causes because that might be inconvenient to the power structure. And basically the idea is a product of the Newtonian model, very mechanistic mindset of the 20th century, where the world is a big machine. If you have a problem with anything in the world, you just tweak the machine. Well, the vast majority of you are not 20th century people. That's why I find it so fascinating that Gen Z is now such an important political demographic. You're 21st century people. And among other things, Gen Z people that I meet don't understand, and I agree with you. Why should you have to live your lives at the effect of bad ideas left over from the 20th century? There was a British physicist named James Jeans who said, as it turns out, the world is not one big machine, the world is one big thought. In order to transform this world, we have to rethink it. And that's why the line, you can live your life one of two ways, either according to circumstances or according to a vision, is practically and politically relevant If all we do is talk about circumstances, we will not be able to heal this country, repair this country, or even recognize how broken it is. But if we talk about vision, then we can have the beginning of an intelligent, meaningful, transformative conversation that just might take us somewhere. In order to do that, I think we have to go back to the beginning, because that's where our national vision was first formed. I'm sure some of you are history students, but even if you're not history students, we all know the basics of this part of American history, and that was the signing of the Declaration of Independence. July 4th, 1776, 56 very brave men signed that document. And that document infused our country with the basic philosophical foundation of our country. And those men were very brave, actually, because if the British had won the war, they would have all been executed as traitors against King George of England. And with the signing of that declaration, they were infused into, once again, the founding of this nation, the formation of this nation, extremely enlightened ideas and extremely radical ideas. They were radical in 1776, and they are radical today. Very morally relevant, spiritually relevant, as well as politically relevant. And they form America's mission statement. And just as with an individual, when you have a mission statement, when you have a company that has a mission statement is important. You keep going back to it. You revisit it. You align your thoughts with it, your commitments, your intentions, your attitudes. It brings together the different members of a system, whether it has to do with a company or a country. Okay, this is the things on which we agree to agree. And part of what the problem is with the Declaration of Independence today is that for too many generations, we're not really taking it into our hearts. It's not enough to just print these principles on parchment and put them behind glass somewhere or to inscribe them on marble walls. In the Jewish religion, it says that every generation must rediscover God for itself. And I think with the Declaration of Independence, we need to revisit it and to take it into our hearts. In fact, Abraham Lincoln said, it is an eternal rebuke to forces of tyranny and oppression. What were those main principles? Number one, it is considered self-evident that all men are created equal. Once again, we see how radical it was. In 1776, it was overthrowing centuries ancient regime, entitlement of a king, a queen, divine right of kings, the king and the king's rich friends, the aristocracy. Sound familiar? And they were entitled to basically the resources, whatever resources they wanted. And everybody else in the society was a little more than a serf in obeisance and servitude to those upper classes. And then it says that God gave all men inalienable rights of life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. Now, I think in today's language, that would be God gave everybody the right to self-actualization. That's very radical. Radical in 1776 and radical today. Third, governments are instituted to support those rights. Once again, radical then, radical now. The purpose of government is to support and to secure. That's what it says. Governments are instituted to secure your right to self-actualize. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and then it gets really juicy. It says that if government is not doing that job, that it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. That's our mission statement. Now, what happened there in 1776? That's where it all started. Radical, wonderful, enlightened, world-changing. But that's also where it got gnarly, because 41 of those 56 were slave owners. So what that means is that we have always been both and. We're not either or, we're both and. We have been in every generation, starting at the beginning, both those who are willing to sacrifice, even sacrificing the possibility of their lives for ideals that are ablaze with infinity of possibility for the human race. And we have also had forces within every generation from the beginning who, for their own financial and/or ideological purposes, had no intention whatsoever of seeing those principles materialize and have proven throughout our history in the most heinous ways they would do whatever it took to make sure that they did not. That's the story of America. That's the bipolar nature of American consciousness. That's our DNA. It's baked into the cake. Now, every generation, even ours, lives out that struggle. And when you see your own circumstances within the larger historical dynamic of that struggle, you see things from a much more expanded lens. So how have we responded to that over time? Well, the way we responded to it over time is pretty well. The arc of the moral universe has, though long, bent towards justice, because generations before us responded to slavery, an obvious transgression against the principles of the Declaration of Independence, with abolition. And generations before us responded to the institutional suppression of women, an obvious transgression against the Declaration of Independence, with the women's suffragist movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment. And other generations responded to the overreach by the capital of the Gilded Age, an obvious transgression against the principles of the Declaration, with the establishment of organized labor. And generations before us responded to segregation in the American South, an obvious transgression against the Declaration, with the establishment of the Civil Rights Movement. I'm running for president because it's our turn now. I'm running for president because we're living out the same struggle. But today, it's not one institutional reality. It's not a cancerous tumor that can be excised. It is rather an economic paradigm which is like a cancer that has already metastasized. And it is the root of our problems today. It is not one institutional reality. It is a matrix of corporate power. It is a matrix of corporate power, from insurance companies to pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, big agricultural companies, big chemical companies, big banks, big oil, gun manufacturers, and defense contractors. And they represent a matrix of power which is institutionalized corporate greed. It is a cancer on our society. It basically owns our government. And at this point, the only hope we have is for the people to step in. How do we do that? We do that with a revolution at the ballot box. And there will be a revolution in this country. As John F. Kennedy said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. 20% of us are doing just fine in today's economy. And that is something to be celebrated by those of us who are in that 20%. But everybody here also knows what's going on in this country over the last 50 years. Over the last 50 years, there's been a massive transfer of wealth to the tune of $50 trillion away from 90%, the bottom 90% of Americans. Now, those of you who are students here might think that I'm just talking about a fairy tale. You might think that what I'm about to describe, while you might intellectually know it's true, you think, oh, certainly that must be hyperbole. This can't be true, even though you know it is true. But let me tell you, just in case you haven't visited it recently, just in case you haven't really taken it in, I'm going to describe to you a land far away. It was called the 1970s. And let me tell you something about the 1970s, okay? The average American worker had decent benefits. The average American worker could afford a home. The average American worker could afford a car. The average American worker could afford a yearly vacation. The average American couple could afford for one parent to stay home with the kids if they wanted. And the average American worker could afford to send their kids to college. Not true today. Not even close to being true today. Today, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 70% of Americans report living with constant economic anxiety. 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt to the tune of an $88 billion medical debt. Although we should also point out that while Americans have an $88 billion medical debt, if you put together the 5 top pharmaceutical companies in the United States, their profit last year alone was $80 billion. Our seniors, half of our seniors live on $25,000 and less a year. 1/3 of America's workers live on less than $15 an hour, and half of them cannot find a place to live. 1.3 million Americans ration their insulin, and a high percentage of our 600,000 homeless people work full time. Now, that is not a thriving middle class. That is a destroyed middle class. We don't really have much of one anymore. Now, unfortunately, everything that I just described is the way America works now. It's kind of baked into the cake, that those conditions are sort of collateral damage. Now, one party doesn't seem to think there's anything wrong with that, and the other party is now guided by the corporatist element of that party, which really finds it unfortunate, those things, man. It's really sad. I remember Bill Clinton saying, "I feel your pain." And in that party, in that corporatist element, which is represented among others by President Joe Biden, they are willing to do everything possible to ameliorate the stress of people, as long as it doesn't undercut or challenge the underlying corporate forces who actually make the return of those pains, of that suffering, inevitable. And why? Because of the economic tyranny of those corporations which form that corporate matrix. Ever since Citizens United particularly, they have a grip, they have a hold, they hold our government hostage. And at this point, when you look at the political media industrial complex, it's not just that this political media industrial complex chops wood and carries water for those corporate forces, they are corporate forces. So that at this point, our governing principle is no longer democracy. Our governing principle is no longer humanitarian values. Our governing principle is short-term profit maximization for huge multinational corporate forces. And those soulless economic forces have now replaced democracy, replaced any sense of ethical responsibility, safety, health, and well-being to the American people as America's bottom line. I'm running for president because that system will not disrupt itself. And according to our Declaration of Independence, if government is not doing its job of securing our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then it is the right of the people to alter it. It's our turn. If abolitionists push back, women's suffragists push back, early labor organizers push back, the civil rights movers push back, who are we? What are we doing? Why are we so seduced? Why are we so numbed out? And a lot of the seduction has to do with places like this and those of us who have made it in America. And then the game is, well, we want you to come in because you're really bright and you're really smart. We want you to come in. We need you to run the machine. And then if you start complaining at any point, I think this is unfair, they say, what are you complaining about? You made it. You went to Dartmouth. You've made it. What are you complaining about? But American dream is not just that you can make it. The American dream is not just that I can make it. The American dream is that we are the keepers of an extraordinary ideal. I have a friend who is a documentary filmmaker. She was born in Lebanon, and she grew up in Norway, and she's a very successful documentary filmmaker about very, very serious subjects and has met with many, many world leaders. And she said to me that she was very surprised at one conference. She went around asking some of the world leaders that she worked with, what keeps you up at night? What really frightens you the most? And she said she was surprised what the answer was from many people who she knew are critics of the United States in many situations. But when she asked them, what scares you most, what keeps you up at night, they gave an answer that surprised her, and yet it was common among them. The answer was that America will go down. So we have an awesome responsibility on our hands. We need to save this thing. And yet we all know we're 6 inches from the cliff. Now, some people, even in my own race for the presidency, for the nomination, say, Marianne, how can you be doing this? Don't you realize the fascists are at the door? Oh, yeah, I definitely realize that. That's why I am doing this. And I'll tell you something. They should never have gotten this close. Something's real wrong that they ever got this close. And I agree with Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, when he said, we will not have to worry about a fascist takeover in the United States as long as democracy delivers on its blessings. If democracy was delivering on its promises, hello, we would have what they have as in every other advanced democracy plus. It's called universal health care. There wouldn't be 1 in 4 million Americans living with medical debt, 18 million Americans unable to fulfill the prescriptions that their doctors give them. I've had 2 doctors, one a doctor in Detroit and one a cardiologist in Texas, and they both told me something that was the same thing. The woman who is the doctor in Detroit said, 15 years ago, if I was seeing a patient and I told the patient what I wanted their medicine or their treatment to be, their common question would be, what are the side effects? Today, the most common question is, how much will it cost? The cardiologist said the same thing. He said, I don't even know why I bother to practice medicine anymore. There are so many million Americans who their insurance will cover the visit to the doctor, but it won't cover the operation, it won't cover the medicine, it won't cover the treatment. In every other advanced democracy, they have universal health care. Not only that, but you know what? The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want it. In every other advanced democracy, they have tuition-free college and tech schools. Why don't we? We had it until the 70s. We had it at University of Florida, University of Texas, and University of California. The reason I think we should cancel the college loan debt is because it should never have existed. It's predatory. You don't behave in a predatory manner against your young. That is unnatural. So not only is it the job of government to support people thriving, to support self-actualization, but the last people you should be exploiting are your young. But where's our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when there are so many carcinogens in our food? Where's our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when there are so many PFAS in our water? 46% of the American urban water supply filled with these forever chemicals. Where's our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when we know what is happening with the climate crisis, and yet we have a president who is supposedly the most liberal among them, who is giving more oil drilling permits than even Trump did, who is okaying the Willow Project, as well as the U.S. Defense Establishment, which is the single largest institutional emitter of greenhouse gases on the planet. Where is our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when millions of Americans are praying when they drop their children off at school that my child will not be shot today? Or that child who is also an American citizen, where's their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that they themselves are praying that they will not get killed today? And where's the right of those millions of American children who are in schools where there aren't even the adequate resources to teach a child to read by the age of 8, which means that that child's chances of high school graduation are much less than their chances of incarceration? What about their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And on and on and on and on. That's why we need a revolution at the ballot box. That's why there's no time left. We are 6 inches from the cliff. Now, the political system, the political establishment, the pseudo-intellectual elite would have you believe that the only people you should trust as qualified to drive us out of this ditch are people whose careers have been ensconced in the car that drove us into this ditch. And that's what I disagree with. I think that the fact that you've been ensconced for years in the car that drove us into this ditch disqualifies you more than qualifies you. Because they are 20th century, not all of them, there's some really good people who work in Washington. This is not about individuals, this is about systems. But when you have people who say, oh, you need to know how to be a political car mechanic, that's not the problem. We have plenty of political car mechanics. You hire them. The problem is that we're on the wrong road. The fact that somebody's a good car mechanic doesn't mean they have any idea necessarily which road you should be taking to San Antonio. Roosevelt said that the biggest job, the most important part of the presidency, was not administrative, but rather moral leadership. Franklin Roosevelt also said that a necessitous man is not a free man. Franklin Roosevelt said that he had what he called 4 freedoms, and 2 of them were freedom of, and 2 of them were freedom from. The freedom ofs, of course, we know. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the right to protest. Tell the people down in Atlanta that. But also freedom from. And the freedom from is the freedom from want and the freedom from fear. The Overton window has moved so far to the right in this country that sounds like some crazy left-wing talk. Nelson Rockefeller would have a hard time even getting into the Republican Party today, and Franklin Roosevelt, I'm afraid, would have a hard time being taken seriously within the Democratic Party. I grew up at a time when the left had a spine. And I also remember that Eisenhower said that the American mind that is left is both liberal and conservative. There are high-minded conservative principles and there are high-minded liberal principles, and we should recognize all of them. Nobody owns this country. There's no one anywhere who has a monopoly on truth. The fact that someone doesn't have a basic agreement with you about politics, that doesn't mean they don't have some good ideas. I'm certainly left of center, but I have very intelligent conservative friends. I read books by some very intelligent conservatives. Even when I don't agree with their conclusion about something, I often learned a little something about their analysis and how their analysis of a situation informed my own. So I think that we need to come out of our silos. We need to come out of our silos, and enough is enough with you're a Jewish American, a Christian American, Muslim American, gay American, straight American, non-binary American, transgender American, white American, black American, brown American. Enough. Not that these individual identities are not important, because they are. But you know, in alchemy, there's this concept of separatio. And in separatio, you separate out the elements to perfect them, but only so they can join together at a higher level. That's the first principle that John Adams wanted us to revisit. Out of many, one. And we're living at a time when what comes after that hyphen is deeply important. We need to come together now and talk about America. We are responsible for something. We are inheritors of a very, very profound ideal. We don't want this to go down on our watch. And we don't want to see this thing go so far that we can't even imagine pulling back from the brink and feel maybe we could have done something. But it's also a very sobering realization that they're not going to. The Republican Party, the corporatist core of the Republican Party, in my opinion, is a nosedive for our democracy. But the corporatist element of the Democratic Party represents a managed decline. We're headed for the iceberg. We're headed for the iceberg we need to turn around. The way the Republican Party acts today, it's a straight line for the iceberg. The way the corporatist Democrats act, we get there more slowly and we hit it at a different angle. I say we need to turn it around. And the generation of those of you in college now have an extremely important part to play. You're 37% of the voting electorate in this next election cycle. You're very, very important. And a place like this, Dartmouth, great elite institution, this is a vortex of power here. This is where you incubate ideas. This is where you listen. This is where you box. You know, you box with God, you box with each other, you box with ideas. This is the time when you can do that. And I believe that it's your civic responsibility. Hear me, but also hear Biden. Hear Bobby Kennedy, hear Cornel West, hear the Republicans. We all owe it. This is not a moment when we should say, well, I know what I think, so I don't agree with this person. This is a time of such crisis where politics should be, you got any good ideas? You got any good ideas? You got any good ideas? That's what it should be. We're becoming numb. We're becoming, people have just been sort of beaten down. And people are in decline, into depression and anxiety. We can't let this happen. We have to wake each other up. You pray in the morning, you kick ass in the afternoon. That's what we have to be now. It's not just about what we need to do, it's about who we need to be to pull this off. And I'm sure that the abolitionists had desperate days. Sometimes I hear people say, I just find this moment traumatizing. I find politics traumatizing. Do you think the people who walked across the bridge at Selma weren't traumatized? You think the women who marched for suffrage and for no other reason were thrown in prison for that? And the conditions in the prison were so awful that they went on a hunger strike? And the response of the prison officials was to send men into their cells and force these metal contraptions on their necks and force feed them. You think they weren't anxious? We need to toughen up, buttercups. We need to hold each other's hand, and we need to spend whatever time we need to during the day to cry, to bemoan, to worry, and then get up and get dressed and get out there and get active. Other generations did it, and in many ways, they did it for us. We have a vision. We have a vision, the Declaration of Independence, and we have to have a vision of a possibility for your future. And an idea grows stronger when it's shared. We have been trained to limit our political imagination. Can you imagine what this country will be like when nobody's worried about health care? Can you imagine what this country will be like when we really know that our food is healthy? You know, there are American companies that produce a product in the United States, and they have to produce it with other ingredients in other countries because other countries will not allow that carcinogenic crap in their nation. Can you imagine what this country will be like when everybody knows that they can have a decent, dignified job on just one job? Can you imagine what this country will be like when people don't have to worry about childcare? Can you imagine what this country will be like when nobody's worried about anything, sending their kids to school? When people aren't worried, scared of gun violence? Can you imagine what this country will be like when we're not afraid of a climate that is in such catastrophic trajectory that we don't know when the next flood or tsunami or wildfire might affect us? Can you imagine? Because we need to imagine. And the fact that they've tried to strip us of our own capacity to imagine is the worst crime of all. But nobody can take that from us if we won't let them. We've been trained to limit our imagination. We've been trained to expect too little. And we've been trained in our political conversations to be so shallow. In our individual conversations, we go deep, and in politics, we're like sixth graders. We just spew narratives that are handed down to us from the PR centers of the Republican and the Democratic Party. If we're going to have a peaceful society, it won't just be because we try to get rid of violence. It will be because we claim a peaceful world, a nonviolent world. So as Martin Luther King said, we need some external shifts in our circumstances, but some internal shifts in our souls. That's the moment to me. That's the zeitgeist to me. It's something different. It's breaking the cord that ties us to a 50-year aberrational chapter of American history. Call it trickle-down economics, call it neoliberalism, call it whatever you want. It should end now. And you will not have the future that you could otherwise have if you don't join with those who want to end it. Let's end what was and begin again. If we just come to that point of intention and willingness in our own hearts and in our own minds, there will be a political breakthrough in this country. There were political breakthroughs before. The abolitionists did it, the women's suffragists did it, the early labor organizers did it, the civil rights workers did it. As I said earlier, it's our turn now. Let's do it. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
This one, sorry, just because of the mic. Thank you so much for those remarks.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it.